from a 48-hour ultimatum to sudden de-escalation. Trump now says the Strait of Hormuz could reopen very soon, even suggesting shared control with Iran's leadership. Is this peace or just a pause before the next escalation? On March 23, 2026, the tone of the conflict shifted, suddenly and without warning. After weeks of escalating rhetoric, military positioning, and direct threats, a new message emerged from Washington. President Donald Trump announced that the Strait of Hormuz could reopen very soon. It was a sharp reversal. Only days earlier, the language had been far more aggressive: warnings, ultimatums, and clear signals of potential confrontation. The region had been bracing for further escalation. Military forces were on alert. Markets were reacting to the growing of disruption. And then the message changed, from pressure to possibility. The implication was immediate. A reopening of the Strait of Hormuz would signal not just a tactical adjustment, but a broader shift in strategy, one that suggested negotiation, or at least de-escalation, had entered the equation. The global reaction was swift. Energy markets responded. Governments recalibrated their assessments. Analysts began searching for meaning behind the sudden pivot, trying to understand whether this was a breakthrough or a pause. Because timing matters. And this announcement came at a moment when tensions were at their highest. Which raised a critical question. Was this the beginning of a diplomatic resolution? Or a strategic repositioning, one step back before the next move forward? But it was not just the shift in tone that captured attention. It was the language. In his statement, President Trump suggested that the Strait of Hormuz could come under joint control between the United States and Iran, a phrase that immediately raised eyebrows across diplomatic and military circles. The implications were profound. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically important waterways in the world, a narrow passage through which a significant portion of global oil supply flows every day. Control over it has long been a point of tension, not cooperation. And now, the idea of shared authority was being introduced. Such a proposal is without precedent. For two adversaries, locked in a cycle of escalation, to potentially coordinate over a critical global choke point would represent a fundamental shift in geopolitical dynamics. It suggests not just de-escalation, but a possible rethinking of how control is exercised in contested regions. The reference to Iranian leadership added another layer. It hinted at communication, perhaps even negotiation, occurring behind the scenes, far beyond what had been publicly acknowledged. But the details remain unclear. What does joint control actually mean in practice? Shared patrols? Coordinated oversight? Or simply an informal understanding to avoid confrontation? The ambiguity is intentional. And in that ambiguity lies both opportunity and uncertainty. Alongside the announcement of a possible reopening, another claim added a new layer of complexity. President Trump stated that the United States and Iran had already engaged in very good and productive conversations. According to his account, these discussions were not just preliminary. They were the foundation for the sudden shift toward de-escalation. The implication was clear. Diplomacy, possibly through back channels, was already in motion. In conflicts of this scale, such communication is not unusual. Negotiations often take place quietly, away from public scrutiny, involving intermediaries, intelligence officials, or trusted envoys operating behind the scenes. But almost immediately, a contradiction emerged. Iranian officials and state media denied that any negotiations, direct or indirect, were taking place. The message from Tehran was firm: no talks, no agreement, no shift in position. This created an information gap. Two opposing narratives, both presented with confidence, but only one could reflect reality, or perhaps neither fully did. In modern conflict, perception is often shaped as much by statements as by actions, and that raises a critical possibility. If talks are happening, they are deliberately hidden. If they are not, then the claim itself becomes strategic, designed to influence markets, allies, or adversaries. Either way, the truth remains uncertain. And in that uncertainty, narrative becomes another battlefield, one where words can shape outcomes long before events on the ground catch up. The shift in rhetoric was quickly followed by action. A planned series of U.S. strikes targeting Iranian energy infrastructure, previously framed as imminent, was suddenly delayed. The timeline moved back by 5 days, creating a pause at a moment when escalation had seemed almost inevitable. This was not a minor adjustment. It was a deliberate signal. By holding back military action, Washington introduced space into a rapidly tightening situation. The pause suggested that diplomacy, whether public or behind the scenes, was being given an opportunity to take shape. At the same time, the threat itself was not removed, only deferred. That distinction matters, because the pressure remained. For allies, the message was one of controlled flexibility. The United States was showing restraint, but not retreat. For adversaries, it was a warning that options were still on the table and that the window for negotiation might be limited. This is the balance of strategic timing. Act too quickly, and escalation becomes unavoidable. Wait too long, and momentum is lost. The 5-day delay sits precisely between those two outcomes, but its meaning is still uncertain. Is this the beginning of a broader de-escalation? An opening that could lead to negotiation and stabilization? Or is it simply a pause in the cycle, a temporary halt before operations resume? For now, the answer remains unclear. And in that uncertainty, the clock continues to run. The reaction was immediate and measurable. Within hours of the announcement, global oil markets shifted direction. Prices, which had surged on fears of prolonged disruption, dropped sharply, falling more than 7% and slipping below the $99 per barrel mark. It was a clear signal. Markets were responding not to confirmed outcomes, but to expectation. The Strait of Hormuz sits at the center of global energy flow. A significant portion of the world's oil supply passes through this narrow corridor, making it one of the most sensitive points in the entire economic system. Any threat to its stability drives prices upward. Any sign of reopening pulls them back down. And in this case, the signal was enough. Investors recalibrated quickly. The possibility of resumed transit suggested improved supply conditions, reduced risk, and a potential easing of pressure across energy markets. Confidence, even if temporary, began to return. But this response also reveals something deeper. Markets are not waiting for certainty. They are reacting to direction. A single statement, without confirmed agreements or visible changes on the ground, was enough to move billions of dollars in value. That reflects how tightly economic systems are linked to geopolitical signals. Because in a conflict like this, words carry weight. They shape expectations, influence decisions, and trigger reactions far beyond the battlefield. And as long as the situation remains fluid, every signal, whether confirmed or not, has the power to move the global economy. Despite the sudden shift in tone, the reality behind the headlines remains uncertain. Two narratives are unfolding at the same time. From Washington, there are claims of progress, talks described as productive, signals of de-escalation, and the possibility of reopening one of the world's most critical waterways. From Tehran, the response is the opposite: denials of any negotiations, rejection of the narrative, and silence on any coordinated path forward. This contradiction creates a strategic fog. It becomes difficult to distinguish between actual diplomacy and messaging designed to shape perception. In modern conflicts, both can exist simultaneously, each serving a different purpose. Adding to the uncertainty is the question of leadership. References to a next Ayatollah suggest that internal dynamics may be shifting. Whether symbolic or substantive, such language points to potential changes at the highest levels of authority, changes that could influence decision-making in unpredictable ways. This combination is volatile. Conflicting narratives, unclear leadership signals, and a conflict already operating under high pressure. It creates an environment where stability is fragile, where a signal of de-escalation can quickly reverse, and where each new statement must be interpreted carefully, not just for what it says, but for what it might mean. Which leads to the central question now facing the world. Is this the beginning of a real diplomatic breakthrough, or simply a pause before the next phase begins?